Welcome back. It's that time now where we cross over to Peter Ndoro. He is in Sandton, and this morning we're discussing a vitally important issue, and that is racism in our country. Peter Ndoro, it's over to you.
Peter.
Yes.
He's just here.
Right, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you very much for joining us. You are in Sandton today, just north of Johannesburg, and this is the venue for the latest in the series of New Age business briefings brought to you by the SABC, and today very kindly sponsored by Transnet. And in conversation today, we're talking about racism. Penny Sparrow, I guess, started this round of conversations, but this is something that's been going on for quite a while now. Some would say for hundreds of years, and we're now entering our 22nd year of democracy and the South Africa project. And the question, I guess, must be, how far have we got, actually? Is 22 years near enough to try and fix some of the wrongs that were created over centuries? As we've been talking, as I've mentioned her name, social media seems to have, in recent weeks, shone a light on some of the feelings that are still quite deep-seated in our country, some of the attitudes and beliefs that people still carry with them. And I think it's fair to say that it's not everybody that has those views, but certainly a number of people do. And so a lot of work still needs to be done in terms of moving South Africa forward. But what is the story of racism? Is it a hangover from apartheid? Are there other issues involved? Economics, redress, reconciliation? And also, when we take all of this into consideration and consider what's happening in other parts of the world, what can we actually hope for at the end of it all? Is it going to be perfect harmony and union, or is it something that we can live with? You tell us what your thoughts are at Morning Live SABC. That's our Twitter handle. We look forward to your questions and your comments. But to help us with this conversation here in Sandton, we've got an audience that's sitting on the floor, and also panelists that are going to be helping us lead this conversation. Let me introduce our panelists now. As we say, a very good morning to you, the Secretary General of the ANC, Sogore Matashe. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Morning, Peter. Morning to the viewers.
Columnist and social commentator. I think a lot of people have read some of your work. Never afraid to say what you feel and what you think. Pinky Kwabane, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much, and I look forward to this discussion, yeah?
All right. Somebody that you've been on opposite sides of conversation is sitting next to you at the moment there. Kelly Creel, the CEO of AfriForum. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome. We look forward to your insights as well.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure being here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Right. And our fourth guest and panelist is the CEO of the Human Science and Research Council, the HSRC, Professor Kryn Sundia. Thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
All right, okay. Normally start from this side going this way, but I'm going to start with you today. And I just your opening thoughts. The scourge of racism in South Africa, it's there. How do we fix it? What are your opening thoughts just to lead us into this conversation?
Well, the first point to make is that the most obvious country to which we would compare ourselves is the United States. A place like the United States has not been able to solve this problem. And they've not solved this problem largely because they've gone about it in a way which has silenced people. And what we are needing to do here is to give people the dignity to be able to say how they feel about their everyday lives. And we are, in those terms, a very different kind of country. But the quality of our speak, I want to say, is not great. The way in which we come to speak about these questions has been actually poor. And this is what I think we're confronting now. We have evidence here, and a major research exercise was conducted by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation towards the end of last year, which shows that South Africans want to live in a space of, if you like, togetherness with other people. The media exercise which we've seen in the last suggests otherwise. But actually, South Africans are much better disposed to this question of the future of South Africa than we think.
All right, okay. I'm going to ask a little bit later on, what is it about this quality of this speech, and how do we get those voices, and as you say, the majority that want a better South Africa, to be able to be heard much more? Kelly, thank you very much for joining us. And you know, AfriForum, straight away, people always kind of look at you as the other side of this conversation. And I know that that must be a difficult place for you, because you put yourself in a defensive position, I guess, as a result. But your thoughts on this conversation?
Well, I think one of the problems with racism is stereotyping, and unfortunately the way AfriForum is used is also a kind of stereotype, which I think is something we should fight. The fact is, I think everybody that wants a prosperous future in this country should come out strongly to say that racism is something that we cannot afford and something that we should eradicate. And from AfriForum's side, we denounce all forms of racism. The problem is that we should not be afraid to take on this discussion, but we should be aware of the fact that there are people that would want to make this a political football. And as soon as you make it a political football, people take on a debate with certain political agendas. And then you create a situation where there is double standards in our debate. And the problem with double standards is only certain racial issues or racial incidents are taken to the public domain. Others are simply ignored and accepted. And this creates a very negative spiral where there's a backlash, and it's a tit-for-tat kind of accusations on the social media. So we should say, and I think the problem also comes in because we viewed racism differently. From my perspective, racism is where your actions and your words and your behavior towards other people are driven by stereotypes and an infringence on the dignity of other people. But unfortunately, this is clouded by the fact that some people say only whites can be racist and black people can't, which I differ from, because if you take that argument, you will perpetuate a situation where whites are the perpetrators, blacks are the victims, and you will have a backlash, and we will go into a spiral downwards. So my point of view is, if we take on racism, let's take on all forms of racism, and that's the only way we'll be able to eradicate it.
Okay. Pinky Kwabane, as a columnist, journalist, writer, you get to observe society often and write about it because you've thought about it. And I'm just wondering what you've seen over 20 years, 22 years we're getting into now, and your thoughts on this conversation, because you have written about it, you've shared your thoughts with us before on paper.
Peter, I think we need to start with the definition of what racism is. Racism is a belief system. It's that system that says, I'm better than Peter because I have a white skin. And it has gone on for over 300 years. I mean, scientifically, we've had, racism analyzed scientifically so that it suited white people, you know. We need to start there and say, when Kali says his view of racism is something else, in the way in which people behave towards each other in terms of demeaning them and their dignity. What do you call somebody who retaliates? I mean, you've had over 300 years of subjugation, violence, aggression, and you are told, actually, just because you're black, you are inferior to me. And white people need to understand this simple thing, fact. It's years of being told this, of superiority. Education system that says, you are better than Pinky because I'm white. We need to acknowledge that the roots of racism go way back. And until such time that white people acknowledge the simple fact that it is in the brain, and some can't help themselves. I mean, it's been inculcated. It's such a deep-seated thing. I mean, as I say, anthropologists, in inverted commas, took time to explain why blacks were inferior, why blacks are monkeys. And that's why this started years ago when anthropologists were saying we look like monkeys and therefore are subhuman. Sparrow says it just the other day. Black people say, oh, what is it about? inferiority complex that's been inculcated in them that says you are inferior, and they accept this. We have a major mental problem, and we need to shift. How are we going to do that? That's what we need to talk about.
Okay, all right. SG, your party's been fighting racism for 104 years, I guess. Or is it up until 94 that the story has changed since then?
I'm in the middle of a book written by a professor I find difficult to pronounce, Professor Khiliomere, who has written a book on the last leaders of Afrikaners. Now, I read this book, and when I read that book, what it helped me with is to understand the thinking of de Klerk when he pronounces on this matter. Racism is about inferiority, superiority relationship. I agree with Pinky on that. And it has been inculcated in the mind of white South Africans over many years that they're superior. And I was looking into the policies developed by Donges and Verwoerd, and then I appreciated in details that racism is in the mind, it is inculcated over many years, and what we should be working on is to build an unracial society where humans are seen as human irrespective of race, color or creed. It's a journey, it's not an incident, it's not an event. What is important about the polemics in the debate now is that it is taking us from a flying up high there and take us on the ground to begin to appreciate the fact that we have avoided debating the matter in earnest, and therefore we are now entering a real transition where people are going to discover that we cannot be apologetic for being black, and we cannot be apologetic for being a majority, and therefore it will talk to all sorts of aspects of society, whether it is the political power, how do you use it to achieve economic power, why should we be settled with economic power being in the hands of minority, land being in the hands of minority. All those issues are going to come to the fore, and we must not duck them, we must deal with them.
Okay, all right. So those are the opening thoughts of our panelists. We're going to start tracking your thoughts on Twitter at home, and also we've got our studio audience here at the venue who are also going to be sharing their thoughts with us. And all of that is coming up after this break. But please, let's get into this conversation. Racism is a scourge. How do we fix it?